Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Dr. Powell, and I'll be your instructor for MPA 530 Public Budgeting and Finance. Thought I'd just provide you with a really quick video introduction to the course concepts, and then also an introduction to me and who I am, and get started for the term. So again, this is a public budgeting and finance course, and as a public budgeting course, there are several salient topics that we need to cover in order to meet the core requirements for the course. So as a public finance and budgeting course, we look at several topics. One topic we'll spend some time on will be budgeting processes. Now, you look at budgeting processes, we're going to look at the process of budgeting at the federal, state, as well as the local level. I know many of us work at the local level, and it's relatively unusual to have folks at the federal level, but we really will frame our discussion around federal budgeting process, because the federal budgeting process really is the touchstone for how we then do budgeting at the state and local level. So in other words, if we understand or at least have a basic concept of how the federal budget process works, it's then going to help us understand what goes on at the state and the local level. Now, admittedly, the federal budget process is very convoluted, it's very complex. There are people who have served literally 30 years in Congress who still don't know all the ins and outs of the federal budget process. And to be honest with you, you could teach an entire course on the federal budgeting process and still not cover all the details in the process. But we will give it the graduate school try, and we will cover the major elements of the process to help us understand state and local budgeting. We'll also then spend a good bit of time talking about what budgets look like. And we'll talk about budgeting formats, budget types. The four main formats that we will focus on primarily in this class are line item budgeting, performance-based budgeting, program-based budgeting, and zero-based budgeting. And one thing that we will highlight when we talk about budget formats is that the development of those budget formats has been something that has been gradual and has evolved over time. And as we have moved from a basic lump sum to a line item budget, and then move from a line item budget to a performance budget, and so on, that evolution really has been marked by a move toward rationality, where we have tried to incorporate new budget formats into our budgeting processes in order to introduce us to additional information that we can then use to better manage our organizations. And our view of what a budget is and what a budget should be used for has changed over time as well. And so once we start using more rational approaches like performance-based budget and program-based budgets and zero-based budgets, we are really raising the bar for our expectations with that budget document. And that now we are expecting that budget document to be a real tool to help us plan and manage the operations of our organization, as opposed to just the document that tells us how much money we're spending and what we're spending that money on. We'll talk about all those different types of budget formats and kind of document for you the evolution of how we've moved from a very basic lump sum budgeting to something much more complex and rational like program-based and zero-based budgeting. We'll also spend time talking about budget analysis. We'll talk about the reasons why we conduct budget analysis, and then I'll introduce you to some of the more common tools that are used in budget analysis. Now, when we get into budget analysis, this is when we're going to get into some of our calculations, and we'll get into some of our formulas. I will not be testing you on formulas and calculations, but it is important that we at least have a general understanding of how we analyze budgets, and we'll have that discussion within the context of why we are analyzing our budgets to begin with. We'll also spend time talking about capital budgeting. We'll make it a point to illustrate that there are two main types of budgets in public budgeting. There are operating budgets and there are capital budgets. Operating budgets are used primarily for the day-to-day functioning of the government. And so things like salaries and things like benefits and supplies are all embodied within your operating budget. They're essentially recurring items. These are things that we are going to spend money on year in and year out. Then the second type of budget is a capital budget. So if we need to fund a new fleet of police vehicles, or we are going to construct a new recreation center or a senior citizen center, those are what we call capital projects. Capital projects are projects that have a long lifespan. Hopefully, if we're going to construct a new city hall, we'd hope that city hall will have a longevity of several generations. With proper maintenance, we would hope that that city hall would be usable maybe for 70, 80, 100 years. So they have very long lifespans, and they're also very high-priced types of items. You may spend $50 million or $70 million or $100 million on a new capital project. I know from a school district perspective, when I joined the school board, the price of a new school, to build a new school, to construct a new school, was in the range of about $30 to $35 million. That cost now for the exact same floor plan has gone up to $65 to $70 million. So these are very high price tag items. So we usually have a separate budgeting process, a separate decision-making process that we're going to use for those long lifespan, high price tag items. And that separate process is a capital budgeting process. So we'll talk about capital budgets, we'll talk about capital improvement plans, and how you construct both capital improvement plans and capital budgets. But to make those types of expenditures, we all know that you need to have revenue in order to spend the money. So we'll also turn our attention in this class to tax-based sources of revenue. When we talk taxation, we'll talk about the big three forms of taxation: property taxes, income taxes, and consumption-based taxes. We will highlight how each one of those tax structures work, and we'll also talk about the advantages and the disadvantages of those tax structures. We'll spend a good bit of time talking about the concepts of progressivity and regressivity. And we'll talk about which of those types of taxes tend to be more progressive in nature, which tend to be more regressive. And if you have a very regressive type of tax, what types of things can you do to take a regressive form of taxation and make it appear and feel a lot more progressive for your taxpayers? We don't just get all of our revenue from taxation. In fact, the typical city in the state of California tends to get more revenue from non-tax revenue sources as opposed to tax-based sources of revenue. Prior to 1978 and Proposition 13, the average California city tended to get a majority of its revenue from property taxes. Because of the limitations imposed by Proposition 13, and we'll talk about those in this class, because of those limitations, it forced local governments to look elsewhere for sources of revenue. So where they looked is they looked for things like user fees and user charges. So we'll talk about user fees and user charges as non-tax sources of revenue, because that's where a lot of local governments really get a good portion of their revenue from. And then we'll also spend time talking about intergovernmental fiscal relations. Not all the revenue that we raise as a government is from own source revenue. A lot of that revenue comes from intergovernmental sources. So we'll get federal grants, we'll get state grants in order to carry out federal and state objectives. So we'll talk about the different types of grants: categorical, block grants, general revenue sharing, and we'll talk about their advantages and their disadvantages. We'll also then, in intergovernmental fiscal relations, talk about mandates. We'll talk about the fiscal implications of mandates. The state government is going to tell a local government to do something and then does not provide the resources to carry out that order. That's what we call an unfunded mandate. And unfunded and partially funded mandates will have serious impacts upon the fiscal solvency of a city. So those are the basic concepts that we're going to generally talk about in this class. You've seen from the syllabus, and again, I recommend that you read the syllabus very, very closely and make sure you're aware of everything in the syllabus. As you can see in the syllabus, we have a couple of textbooks. The first one is the Fiscal Administration text by John Mikesell. That's the primary textbook for this course. And John Mikesell's text has been around for many, many years. And to tell you how old I am, when I was taking a budgeting course in my doctoral program, the textbook we had was actually a pre-publication draft of Fiscal Administration by John Mikesell. And now Mikesell is in the 10th edition. I think there's actually an 11th edition that's coming out sometime later on this year. In my opinion, it is the best textbook for a budgeting course like this. And the reason for that is I recognize that when people come into the 530 course, you come in from a variety of different backgrounds. You know, I've had some students come into this class who manage $500 million capital budgets. And so they're very familiar with the budgeting process. They're very familiar with all the nuances in public budgeting. But in the same class, I can have someone else who comes in who their exposure to budgeting is balancing their household checkbook. That's fine. And everyone is welcome in the class. But I think the Mike Sell book really does a good job of creating an even playing field for everyone, regardless of the amount of experience they have in public budgeting when they enter the course. So it's a great text. The disadvantage with the Mike Sell textbook is it tends to be wildly expensive, and it tends to be far too expensive for any textbook, in my opinion. So because I recognize the high cost imposed by the Mike Sell text, I'm allowing you to use any edition of the Mike Sell textbook that you would like to use from 7th to 10th edition. If you can get the 7th edition, that's certainly going to save you a lot of money. You can get it for pennies on the dollar. The bookstore is stocking the 10th edition, so you're welcome to use any edition from 7th to 10th. The course, when it was set up, was designed around the 7th edition. So the chapter numbers all correspond to the 7th edition of the textbook. So if you're using a newer version of the textbook, the chapters haven't changed very much at all, just the numbers changed a little bit. So instead of focusing on chapter number, focus on the title of the chapter. And that will help keep you in alignment with the topics that we are covering each week in the class. But I think you'll enjoy the Mike Sell textbook. I think it's a very usable textbook. It's a type of textbook you're probably going to want to hold on to if you anticipate doing anything in the world of budgeting and finance later on after you graduate from the program. Then the other text is one that you already have, and that's a Classics of Public Administration. You have that from your 510 class, so you should be very familiar with that textbook. We're going to pull some of those classical articles that you've probably read before and apply them to the world of public budgeting and finance. So that's kind of your supplemental textbook that you shouldn't have to buy, that you should also always have it in your personal library. So what will you be doing in this class? So let's talk a little bit about your course assignments. So we tried to design the class, or the class was designed with a variety of different types of assignments. So you'll have multimedia discussion boards, and you've probably done this in some of your other courses. This is kind of the staple assignment in this MPA program. So you'll have 5 of those multimedia discussion board assignments where you will create a PowerPoint presentation or a presentation using whatever type of software program you'd like to use, and then you will narrate that, that presentation. You'll have 5 of those at 50 points each. Then you'll have traditional discussion board posts, which are non-multimedia, but they're kind of the traditional, participating in discussion board. You've got a couple of those traditional discussion board posts. You have some journal assignments. You have 3 traditional journal assignments. And then in week 6, you're going to have a bigger journal assignment, one that's going to require a little bit more work. That's why it's worth a few more points. There'll be a bond assessment essay, and then finally the critical assignment. As you know, every course in this program will require a critical assignment for you to successfully complete the course. And we have a 2-part critical assignment in this class, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that critical assignment later on. Late policy, do try to get everything in on time. There's a 10% per day penalty for late assignments. If life intervenes, and I know life has been intervening a lot since February or March, all you have to do is just let me know. Send me an email in advance, alert me to the situation that's going on. You can always end up getting an extension for a day or 2 if necessary, but I need to know in advance of the due date. So once you contact me in advance of the due date, we'll be able to set up an extension, and we'll be able to avoid that late paper policy. So a little bit about me. Again, my name is Dr. Powell, and I am entering overall, I guess this is my 25th or 25th, I think, year as a full-time faculty member in public administration and or political science programs. I was born and raised in Cleveland. I got my undergraduate degrees in political science and history from Baldwin Wallace University, a small private liberal arts college just outside of Cleveland, Ohio, and it's the college up there on the right-hand corner in that picture. Middle picture is Ohio University, and that's where I got my master's degree in political science. My wife also attended Ohio University. My daughter attended Ohio University, and my oldest son is now a senior this year at Ohio University. Then the bottom right is Miami. That's where I got my PhD, again, in political science. After getting my PhD in political science, I immediately went into a full-time faculty member position at a university called Eastern Illinois University in lovely, scenic Charleston, Illinois, in the middle of the state of Illinois. I made the mistake when I first got to Eastern Illinois of referring to it as Southern Illinois, and I was told very quickly it's not Southern Illinois, it's Central Illinois. And so it's in the middle of Illinois and Central Illinois. Was there for 4 years teaching in the political science department, teaching primarily public budgeting, personnel management, state and local government, Illinois government, American government, Congress, presidency, kind of a, as I like to call, a utility infielder, teaching a lot of the different courses that needed to be taught within the program. Taught both at the undergraduate as well as a graduate level at Eastern Illinois. Then I went down to Florida to a university called Florida Gulf Coast University. It was a brand new university. I got there its 4th year of existence. They had just started an MPA program, and so I joined their new fledgling MPA program. Had the opportunity to develop a bachelor's program in political science that's still going strong at Florida Gulf Coast. So spent about a year there and then came out to California and accepted a position at California State University, Long Beach, hence the Go Beach picture on your screen. And I got to Long Beach in 2001, and I've been there ever since as a full-time position. I'm currently the department chair for the Graduate Center for Public Policy and Administration, and I'm also a program director for the Distance Learning MPA program. When I'm not teaching and doing research, kind of my side gig, if you will, is as an elected official. And I've been serving on the Saugus Union School District Board of Governors for the past 6 years. I was appointed in 2014, re-elected in 2016. My term ends in this year. My last day of my term is actually December 11th, but who's counting? And I'll be retiring from elective position as of this December. So that's a little bit about me. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have about either me or the course. The best way to ask me questions is via email. So just shoot me an email, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. If you have a question that you think will require more than just an email or something that can't be communicated in an email, send me an email and let me know, and we can always set up a Zoom session, and we can hold a Zoom session to answer any questions that you have. But always feel free to reach out, ask any questions. Please do review the syllabus. If you have any questions about the syllabus, let me know as well. Otherwise, I'm very happy to virtually be able to meet you. Every week, I'll be putting up a video that will kind of be an introduction to the information each week. And so I try and keep those videos about 20 to 30 minutes long so that I'm not inundating you with a lot of information. But it's a good way to kind of have a touch point every single week so that we can kind of remain in contact, which I think is vital for distance learning types of courses like this. But again, reach out to me if you have any questions at all. Otherwise, I look forward to working with you this term. Take care.